Going through a sermon series on the issues that are facing families today. And so today we're going to look at the fifth most and the fourth most important issues. We're going to combine them because there is a little bit of a connection between them. And they are the lack of discipline in families today, and the fourth one, the absence of father figures. Now, the sermon series was developed by a survey conducted by Lifeway, and as part of that survey, the respondents sent in the following comments. And in regard to the lack of discipline, Jeff from Decula, Georgia said, "Two sides of the same coin are self-discipline and self-respect. Children do not see the modeling of these attributes in parents or other adults. Therefore, they grow into self-absorbed and selfish adults." And Karen from Marshall, Texas said, "Without discipline and respect in the home, there is none in the world." Then in regard to the absenteeism of fathers, Pam in Brooks, Georgia said, "The father plays a most important role in the stability of the family, and when he is missing, the family structure is unbalanced and void of the male figure God intended to lead and grow the family. Children are growing up with trust issues along with bitterness toward the male role from the feeling of abandonment." And then finally, Renita from Woodward, Oklahoma said, "If the fathers in our families do not take the spiritual leadership, how will our children learn to follow God, their heavenly Father's leadership?" I think for those of you who know my wife Jennifer, know that she has a penchant for animals and a love for animals. I thought I should probably update you. Things are constantly in flux. We're down to 3 rabbits, 2 chickens. We're up to 3 birds and down to 1 dog, if we can call that sorry excuse on the left there for a dog. Bella is the one on the left. And before we had Bella, we had Raven. Raven we inherited from our son, who could no longer have Raven. We no longer have Raven now. Killed about 6 too many chickens, is now with another owner. But we loved Raven. Raven was one of the smartest dogs we can ever have. And I'll never forget that first night. We had Raven. We brought Bella home for the first night. And Bella, when we got Bella, she was a little less than a year old. The previous owners both worked, so basically she sat in the kennel all day, took her out for a couple hours, and then sat back in the kennel again all night. And they realized that wasn't a decent life for a dog. And so the first night, I remember that first night, we brought her home. We had her in the kennel, obviously a small dog in bladder control. And obviously, having spent most of her life in the kennel, did not want to be in there. We had her in our bedroom, and so she was sitting there starting to whine and whine and whine. We would tell her, "Be quiet." And Raven saw that we were starting to get a little upset with her. And so Raven decided she was going to take things into her own hand. So the black lab gets up, walks over, stands in front of the kennel, looks in, and starts growling at Bella. And I mean, it was clear as day. Obviously, there was no doubt in our mind what she was doing. She was saying, "It's time to go to bed. Knock it off." It was absolutely amazing that this dog could sense our frustration, could get up, and it literally was disciplining and teaching Bella the rules of the trade. And of course, Jennifer was trying to honor my wish of no dogs in the bed, but this actually happened 2 or 3 times. Raven would go, she would stop, Raven would go sit down. A few minutes later, start whimpering again. Raven would get back up and do it one more time. So it was clear what she was doing. Eventually, we lost out. The dog ended up in the bed and still sleeps there to this day. But it was really clear that Raven was disciplining Bella and teaching her the rules of the house. It was bedtime, and it was fascinating to see animals behave in this manner. Now, this isn't the only case of where disciplining happens within God's created world. Some times ago, there at the Kruger National Park, which is a game preserve in South Africa, they were faced with a growing elephant problem. And the population of elephants was increasing. It was once endangered, but now had grown so large that that they could no longer sustain the elephants, and so they had to take measures to thin the ranks. And so the plan was to relocate some of the elephants to other game preserves within Africa. But these are obviously enormous creatures and are not easily transported. So they had to create a special harness. I think the next picture shows that harness where they created to airlift the elephants to fly them out of the park using helicopters. Now, the helicopters were up to the task, but as it turned out, the harness wasn't. They were able to handle the juvenile and the female adults, but of course in this species, the bull elephants are much, much larger, and the harness was not able to handle them. And so they had to make a quick solution. And so what they decided to do was to leave the much larger bulls behind and just to relocate the juveniles and the female elephants. And so the herd was thinned out, and all was well at Kruger National Park, and the problem was solved. So they thought. Something later, a very strange problem surfaced in the new park where the elephants had been transferred to, the new elephants. In this other park, they began to find dead bodies of endangered white rhinoceros. And at first they suspected it was poachers that might be killing the rhinoceros, but there was no evidence of gunshot wounds, and the horns were left intact. So if it was a poacher, they would have taken the horns. And there was evidence of really violent death, puncture wounds. And so they put up some hidden cameras, and the result was shocking because the culprits turned out to be marauding bands of aggressive juvenile male elephants. I guess we could call them teenagers. These very elephants that were relocated from Kruger National Park. And the young males were caught on camera chasing down the rhinos, knocking them over and stomping and goring them to death. The juvenile elephants were terrorizing other animals also at the park. And this happens to be a very, very rare thing to happen among elephants, and it was very unusual to see a very large amount of this all of a sudden just going on. And so some of the park rangers settled on a theory, and what had been missing? Well, it was the presence of the large, dominant bulls. And under the natural circumstances, the adult bulls actually provided discipline. They provided modeling behaviors for the younger elephants, keeping them in line. And so this was missing under this new environment, and these young elephants were not learning proper pachyderm protocol. So to test their theories, the rangers did end up constructing a bigger and stronger harness. They were able to get a few of the adult males over to the new park where the problems they were having. Within a few weeks, the problem was gone. It just took a few weeks. The older bulls let them know that their behaviors were not elephant-like at all. And they were disciplined and brought into line by the adult males. Isn't that amazing? In God's design, we see this interaction, this discipline, this process by which we train our young how to behave. It's also interesting in a terrific article by Dr. Wade Horn called Of Elephants and Men. He went on to write of another story very similar to that of the elephants, though it happened not in Africa. This story happened in New York's Central Park. And the story involved young men, not elephants, but the deeds were eerily similar. Groups of young men were caught on camera sexually harassing and robbing women and victimizing others in the park. They had this herd mentality which created a sort of a frenzy that was brazen and contagious. And in broad daylight, they seemed to actually compete with each other, even laughing and mugging for the cameras as they assaulted and robbed people that were passing by. And it was not, in any sense of the term, the behavior of civilized men. And appalled by these assaults, citizens demanded that there would be stronger and more aggressive police presence within the park. But Dr. Horn, in writing this article, asked a more probing question: where have all the fathers gone? Simply increasing the presence of police does little to identify and to solve really the social issue behind these assaults. Really it was the very same problem that victimized the rhinos in that park in Africa, because the majority of these young men hanging around and committing these crimes grew up in homes without fathers present. I've had the chance to be involved in prison ministry and actually to go in and to hear confessions from prisoners and to speak with them. And many that are in prison are there because they never knew a father's love and discipline. And as a result of that, they have become very angry men with little or no self-worth and are numb to causing harm to others or to themselves through either drug abuse or sex abuse and violence. And so